video, I'll be sharing some tips that I used in order to score for the language acquisition examination for the MYP assessment, in which I took Mandarin as my foreign language. So the first thing to know is your question words, and although they seem basic, when it's a foreign language, it's no longer that basic. The important ones are obviously who, what, where, when, why, and how. One thing that's really hard about a language examination is that you can't guarantee that you'll know every single word, character that's present there. So language is so wide, there's only so much you can learn when it's a foreign language as well. So the one thing you can try to do is to recognize common question words that often appear in questions. So when you recognize some other words and characters, you can easily piece together what the question wants. Because sometimes even if you know the answer, if you can't read the question, if you can't understand it, there's no point really. Another thing is, it depends on the language, but for the Mandarin language at least, commonly you can answer a question just by replacing the question word with the answer. Meaning I can copy the entire sentence structure and replace the question word with the answer. This is really important because in the language acquisition examination for the e-assessment format, you're able to copy and paste pieces of information from the question and from the reading passage as well. Meaning the reading passage is not a photo, you're able to copy and paste the words and characters there. And the questions as well, you're able to copy it. So what I used to do is in the reading examination, listening as well, I would just copy down the entire question and change the answer for the question words. Because sometimes I recognize the meaning of the question, I know how to answer it, but I don't know exactly how to type it out using my keyboard. So this is really helpful in order to know your question words, know what the question is asking, because you can easily just copy the sentence and change the question word, and there's your answer. This is often 1 mark, and it's very helpful in answering many questions in which you don't know how to type it down. And of course, another thing is there are many other common words in general that you see here. These are just a few because there's many things such as, for example, true and false questions are quite common. So in that sense, you should know when they're asking you to complete a sentence, when they're asking you for your opinion, when they're asking right or wrong. So at times, this helps you to at least understand the question, which is the first thing that you should target before answering the question. Because for most of the time, the 1 mark questions, you can easily just replace the question word. 2 mark questions are generally one that requires your own opinion. That one may require you more input from you, but otherwise for a 1 mark question in which you're just able to easily copy and paste, understanding the question is very important because it may just be easy marks for you to obtain. And besides this, these are generally 2 mark questions because they're generally one that requires your own personal input. There's nothing that you directly copy or take from the listening passage or the reading passage. There are some common questions in which, for example, they'll ask you to give a title or a basic title for this entire passage. Basically, a title that represents what the passage is talking about. And they'll also often ask you for the theme and subject. And the text type, is it a blog, article, interview, dialogue? There's many types. They'll ask you for the purpose of the passage. Here, I just put it all in Mandarin for reference, but you'll have to know it in your own language, whichever language you're taking the exam in. And they'll often ask the feeling and mood of a certain person or the entire passage itself. They'll ask you for tone, which is another way they can ask you for feeling and mood. And they'll ask, the common question is, how does the passage, reading or listening, how do they present the information such that it's easy for the audience to understand, easy for them to listen to, and easy for them to read? So this is quite a common question. Another thing is whether you agree or disagree with something. And another question is whether something is similar or not similar. These are all very common questions that will surely appear. And because they're common questions, you are able to actually prepare some common answers in which you prepare sort of a guide for where you can just fill in the blanks during the actual examination day. Of course, the text type, IB themselves releases what text types they will use in their examinations in general. So you'll have to take note of that and know the Mandarin characters for every single text type there. And purpose, you can memorize common words such as inform, persuade, entertain. For me, what I used to do is an easy way to give a purpose, because usually for me, I did the emergent examination, meaning it's for foreigners. So what I did is I would, most of the time, the purpose would be to inform, because of course I'm not advanced enough to be able to receive a text such as to persuade, entertain. Usually it's always to inform. So I would say to inform and memorize what the audience is, to inform the audience of this type of content. So I memorize the word content, so I just fill in the blank in the middle. And feeling and mood, memorize the common moods. Usually it's always happy. Not once have I seen sad, angry, or worried. It's usually always happy, so that's the main feeling that you actually have to know. And the same with tone. What tone is the person speaking, the listening passage speaking with? And for easy to understand, there are some common things you can remember. For reading, you can say they're using images, they're using colorful images that illustrate it better. That's such a common phrase that you can use for everything, because they're not expecting you to specify anything. You can say they separated the text into shorter passages, so it's easy to understand. You don't even have to explain this much, because mostly they just ask you to list. So write it in a way that's easy for you to remember. And they can say that the content is interesting or something that's it may seem very childish, but honestly, for a foreign exam, for a foreign language, this is really what they're expecting. For listening, sometimes they give you images as well. You can say the usage of happy music or upbeat music, and the tone of the voice is soothing, easy to listen to, something like that. These are questions that will once again get you 2 marks. These are the main type of questions that will come up. It'll either be 1 mark questions where, okay, you copy and paste the sentence and you change the question word and you answer the question, or 2 mark questions in which they normally ask you one of these and you have to give your own personal input. Besides these questions, they often ask you questions for like your complete opinion, in which has nothing to do with the text. It's something, let's say the text is about school, saying this person's school is like this. What is your school life like? Something like that. Those questions also appear in which it has nothing to do with the text that you're actually given. And just to illustrate this, I also want to show you what the examination will look like. So this is the Mandarin specimen paper that I have. It's basically what the examination will look like. And if you haven't seen the video explaining the e-assessment format, this is what it'll look like. There'll be questions on the right in which you can choose the questions. And there's this moon thing in which it'll be shaded once you answer a few questions. But as I mentioned before, it's a bit weird in the sense where you can answer 2 out of 10 questions, but it'll be filled halfway. So you can't really trust that circle, because otherwise you'll have to keep track of it on your own. Otherwise you'll miss out how many questions you've actually answered and not answered. So the first question is a listening passage. You can see that, for example, this question. In this question, this is not really a question word, but for the Mandarin language, this is the one character that I have to replace, in which I can copy and paste the entire sentence and just replace that one character. So you'll have to see what you can do about that for your own language. Besides that, there's obviously some choosing questions. And they're asking you to explain why. So you can explain your reason and then copy the rest of the sentence. And just generally other questions. For example, here, they're asking for the subject. Here they give you options, so you just choose one based on the listening passage. This is feeling, and they're asking what feeling does the music in this listening passage give? And here they're asking for the audience. What audience would find this content interesting and why? And here they're saying tone, here's purpose. Here they're asking, I'm not sure anymore, it's been a long time since I've done this. They're asking whether something is the same or not. And this one is your own total personal input. So you can see just from this one question itself, there are many things that I've already mentioned as part of my tips that are very common questions. And taking a look at the second question, this one is the reading passage. As I mentioned, you can copy and paste the answer, so you don't have to worry about not being able to type it down because you're able to copy and paste it. So the reading passage is honestly the same as well. Just to show you the full paper, it's the second question. The third question, one common question is they'll ask you to compare between the listening and reading passage, at least 2 questions, because they give you 2 listening passages and 2 reading passages. So they'll ask you one comparison question for one set of listening and reading, and the other set of listening and reading. This one is the second listening passage. And just for me personally, the listening exam is the hardest section out of all sections, listening, reading, and writing, purely because the type of audios they tend to give you is one where whatever happens in the audio is what happens in a natural background in which you hear background noise, other people talking, you hear these like the wind, whatever. So it's very hard to listen to what the people are actually saying, which makes it really difficult for someone who's not used to hearing the language in a daily environment. So they purposely do that, but it's very hard. So I would suggest for anyone who's not familiar with the language at all to focus more on reading and writing, because those are ones where you can more easily score, even if because you're able to easily copy and paste and you can recognize it a bit easily. And for listening, you won't completely lose the marks because there are a few questions where it's asking for your opinion. So you won't be losing all the marks, but you can't be expecting to score that high either. And this is the second reading passage. It's an interview. This is the true or false section. This is right and wrong, and they ask you for a reason why. And this entire thing is just 1 mark with the option and the answer. And this is the question, this is the comparison question between the reading and listening passage once more. Finally, moving on to the writing passage, they'll give you 2 options to choose from. This is the first option. Usually they'll give you some image to help you picture whatever they're saying a bit better. So worst case, you won't be totally lost. And the second option is this. They'll ask you to choose your option and to give your answer. You can see here they don't explicitly mention a word count. You won't get penalized if you go under or above a certain word count, since the examination themselves doesn't specify anything. So you don't have to worry too much about the word count. Just try to make sure it's not too low. It's okay if it's a bit above, but not too low. So another thing about this entire examination is to take note of the global context. For me, it was personal and cultural expression. So I was expecting questions on audio clips and reading passages in relation to that. And one thing, the writing question that I chose was one that asked me to talk about Chinese New Year. So that's one thing that you can take note of, is that for this type of global context, if they ask you for anything culturally specific, it'll only be specific to the language in which you're learning. So because I was learning Mandarin, I was asked for Chinese New Year, but you'll never be asked about any festival that's not specific to China. I won't be specifically asked about Christmas. Maybe I'll be asked generally about festivals, but I won't be specified on Christmas. So for festivals and such that are common and related to your global context, of course, you can take note and learn some vocabulary around that topic, because that's something that may come out because you're expected to not only learn the language, but the culture surrounding the language as well. And that's all I have to say for the language acquisition examination, because once you prepare for all of it, it's everything you do on the spot. So thank you for watching.